I won't choose. I'll keep you both." Those words would one day hang over Sagebrush Crossing like the dust that never quite settled on Main Street. But on the first afternoon Maylene rolled into that little western town, she did not look like a woman who would dare say anything like that. She looked like someone who had spent most of her life saying, "Yes, sir," and "I'm sorry," in a language no one here understood. Sagebrush Crossing sat where the railroad bent like a tired elbow between two low ridges. In the dry season, the wind carried grit straight into your teeth. In the wet season, the mud swallowed wagon wheels up to the hubs. Folks there believed in simple things. One church, one preacher, one bell that rang twice on Sunday. One man for one woman, and if life broke that rule, they tried not to talk about it for too long. The first person to notice the wagon that day was old Mrs. Hargrove, who kept her curtains half open and her judgments fully ready. The wagon wasn't like the others. No family on top, no laughing kids, no trunks tied with rope. Just a driver, hunched over, and beside him a small woman in a faded blue coat, hands folded in her lap like she was afraid of taking up too much space. When the wagon stopped in front of the livery, the driver climbed down first. "This your stop, miss," he said, almost gently. "Sagebrush Crossing. That's the boarding house yonder." The woman nodded. She moved carefully, like every step might be the wrong one. As she climbed down, the coat shifted, and you could see how thin she was, but there was a steadiness in the way her feet found the ground. Her hair was pinned up in the simple knot women from Chinatown used when they were working, not celebrating. Her name was Maylene, but no one in town knew that yet. To most of them, at first, she was just the Chinese woman. If you had followed her life backward from that wagon, you would have found a narrow house in a crowded quarter of San Francisco. You would have heard a father's voice bargaining with a stranger at the door, heard the rustle of paper as a contract changed hands, heard a girl swallowing her questions because her family needed to eat. You would have seen a marriage arranged by money, not by tenderness. A husband who needed a cook more than a partner. A railroad camp kitchen that smelled of sweat and coal and cheap tobacco. Then one night, a lantern knocked over in a fight, flames licking up the walls, men running, shouting. The next morning, a patch of blackened earth where her husband's bunk had been, and no one quite willing to say if he had died in the fire or just walked away. Either way, Maylene was left with his debt. By the time she reached Sagebrush Crossing, she had learned two things clearly. First, that a woman like her could be bought and sent anywhere a man wished. Second, that if she wanted to live at all, she had to make herself small. Small in her footsteps, small in her voice, small in her hopes. She took a room at Mrs. Carver's boarding house, the one with the crooked steps and the smell of boiled cabbage that never quite left the wallpaper. She paid for 2 weeks in advance with money she had hidden in the hem of her skirt. Then she did what she had always done. She went to the kitchen. "Do you know your way around a stove?" Mrs. Carver asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Maylene nodded. "I can cook," she said in careful English. "I can make food for many men." Mrs. Carver hesitated, then shrugged. "Boarding house is full. Railroad boys, cowhands, drifters. If you can keep them full and quiet, you can stay." That was how the men of Sagebrush Crossing first met her. Not as a bride, not as a scandal, not as the woman who would one day stand in the street between two hearts. They met her over bowls of steaming rice and stew that tasted somehow cleaner with the herbs she slipped in. They met her when she moved between tables with her head slightly bowed, asking, "More?" in a soft voice that made even the roughest cowhand lower his own. Among those men were two who always sat together when they could. Thomas Reed was easy to spot. Broad shoulders, sun-browned skin, a smile that reached his eyes even when his hands were covered in dust from the ranch. He wore his hat tilted back just enough to show he wasn't afraid of looking anyone in the eye. If Sagebrush Crossing had needed a picture of what they wanted a good man to look like, they could have put Thomas on the church wall and been done with it. Beside him sat Li Wei. He was quieter, his shoulders narrower, but there was a strength in the way he held himself, as if an invisible pole ran straight down his spine. His hands were scarred from years on the railroad, laying track in heat and snow, but his nails were always clean. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his English came out careful, like each word had been chosen and weighed. People sometimes forgot that Thomas and Li Wei were friends until they saw them together. Then they remembered. The tall rancher and the Chinese track worker who had pulled each other out of more than one bar fight and once out of a flooded arroyo. They had shared bunkhouses, shared paydays, and more than once, shared the blame when something at the railroad camp went wrong and no one wanted to sort out which man had started it. Now they shared a table at Mrs. Carver's, boots resting on the same worn floorboards, shoulders almost touching when the room got crowded. The first time Mei Lin brought them their plates, she did not look at them for long. Just set the food down, murmured a soft, "Here," and moved on. But something made her glance back, just once. Thomas was already eating, grateful, talking about a lame horse and a broken fence. Li Wei, though, was watching her. Not in the way some men watched women who served them. Not with hunger or calculation. He watched her like a man might watch a storm cloud far off on the horizon, respectful, curious, a little afraid of what might be hidden inside. Mei Lin turned away quickly, heart beating faster than a simple meal should require. She told herself it was nothing, just another face in another town that would forget her when she moved on. But Sagebrush Crossing was not going to forget her. And those two men, still laughing together over hot stew and fresh bread, had no idea that the quiet Chinese woman refilling their coffee would one day stand between them in the middle of Main Street and say with a voice steady enough to shake their whole world, "I won't choose. I'll keep you both." The days slipped into a kind of rhythm after that. If you had walked into Mrs. Carver's boarding house in those weeks, you might have thought the quiet Chinese woman in the kitchen was just another part of the furniture. Stove, table, chipped plates, Mei Lin. She rose before dawn, lit the fire, and boiled water. She washed vegetables, kneaded dough, and let the smell of ginger and onion slowly push the night out of the house. By the time the men stumbled in, half-dressed and half awake, the room was warm and full of steam. "Morning, miss," Thomas would say, tipping his hat even when he wasn't wearing it. "That stew of yours could wake the dead." Mei Lin would nod, eyes dropping to the bowls in her hands. "Eat while hot," she would answer. It was the safest thing to say. Li Wei said even less. He would murmur "thank you" in English, then sit and listen. Sometimes, when the others were loud and the room felt like it could burst, he would glance toward the kitchen and find her already looking back. Each time, one of them would look away first. They took turns pretending it had not happened. If you have ever spent your life working behind a doorway, you know that the door itself becomes a kind of mercy. Mei Lin learned to stand just inside the frame, close enough to hear the men, far enough that most of them forgot she was there. She heard everything. She heard the ranch hands complain about weather and fences. She heard railroad men curse the company and then themselves. She heard two cowboys argue over a girl who had left town 3 years ago and was never coming back. She heard Thomas laugh about almost falling asleep in the saddle. She heard Li Wei say quietly, "You do that, you break your neck. Then what will your horses do without you?" She heard the word Chinaman more than once. Sometimes it came out hard, sometimes soft, sometimes stuck to a joke that wasn't quite funny. The first time someone used it loud, with an edge, they meant Li Wei. It was a rainy evening, one of those rare nights when the dust turned to slick mud and the smell of wet leather filled the house. The men had been drinking since afternoon. Mei Lin was clearing plates when she heard a voice from the corner. "I swear," a ranch hand named Porter said, his words thick. "Every time I come in here seems like there's more of them. First the railroad, now the kitchen, now my table. Maybe next Sunday the preacher will start preaching in Chinese too." A few men laughed. It was the kind of laugh that hangs in the air, waiting to see if it has gone too far. Thomas set his cup down. The sound was not loud, but it cut through the room. "You got a problem with the food, Porter?" he asked, easy on the surface. Porter shrugged. "Food's fine. Just don't like feeling like a stranger in my own town." Mei Lin froze in the doorway, a stack of plates in her arms. She did not breathe. She had heard this kind of talk before. She knew how it usually ended. A man would stand up, another would stand too. Someone would hit the table and somehow the blame would land on the smallest person in the room. Li Wei did not look up right away. He finished chewing, wiped his mouth, and then lifted his eyes. "This your town alone?" he asked Porter. His voice was calm, almost curious. "You build every house, lay every board?" Porter snorted. "Don't need to. My people did." Thomas leaned back in his chair. His smile had faded, but his voice stayed gentle. "Funny thing, Porter. Seems to me your people and his people bled on the same tracks to get this railroad here at all. And last I checked, nobody put your name on the sign at the edge of town." A few men shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. The room smelled of rain and something else now. Pride, shame. It's hard to tell them apart when they're fresh. Porter looked at Thomas, then at Li Wei. For a second, Mei Lin saw the moment when a fist might rise, when a chair might scrape back. Instead, Porter reached for his cup. "Didn't say the food was bad," he muttered. "Just talking." "Then talk softer," Thomas said. "Some of us are trying to eat." The danger passed like a cloud sliding over the sun. The room brightened by small degrees. Men went back to their bowls. Someone changed the subject to cattle prices. The moment became another story no one would admit to remembering. But Mei Lin remembered. Later that night, after the men had gone and the boarding house had settled into its creaking sleep, she stood at the sink, hands in cold water, washing the last plates. The lamp burned low. The house was quiet. "You shouldn't have to hear that," a voice said softly behind her. "Not after cooking for us all day." She turned. Thomas was standing in the doorway now, hat in his hand, hair still damp from the rain. "I hear many things," Mei Lin said. "Words can't break bone." Thomas nodded slowly. "No, but they can bruise places you don't show to a doctor." For a second, she almost smiled. It surprised her how close the feeling came. "You are kind, Mr. Thomas," she said. "He's too kind for men who drink so much." "I drink too," he said. "Just not enough to forget who cooked my dinner." He tipped his hat and left. It was nothing, really. Just a man being decent. But if you have ever lived on scraps of kindness, you know how one soft word can echo for days. A week later, a different man came to the back door. Mei Lin was sorting herbs on the table, laying them out in neat little piles. Dried orange peel, ginger, chrysanthemum buds she had bought from a traveling peddler at twice the price they were worth. She had almost finished tucking them into jars when there was a knock. She wiped her hands and opened the door. Li Wei stood there, hat off, hair still damp with sweat from the tracks. His shirt was torn near the shoulder. There was dried blood on the fabric. "You are hurt," Mei Lin said, the English words coming out sharper than she meant. He looked down, almost surprised. "It's nothing." "It is not nothing." Her voice slipped into Chinese before she could stop it. "If that gets infected, you'll lose more than a shirt." Li Wei blinked. The sound of his own language in this narrow Western kitchen seemed to change the air. "You speak Cantonese," he answered, matching her tongue. "I thought you stayed quiet because you were ashamed of it." She felt heat rise in her face. "I stay quiet because it is safer," she said. "Sit." He sat. She fetched a basin, poured water, added a pinch of herbs. Her hands were steady as she cut away the torn cloth, cleaned the wound, and dabbed it with a bitter-smelling paste. "You should have gone to doctor," she said. "He went back east last month," Li Wei answered. "Didn't you hear? Town's too small for him to make a living. I told Thomas somebody else would have to patch me up." He looked at her then. "Didn't know it would be you." There was no flirt in his tone, just a simple, bare truth that made her fingers tremble. "Hold still," she said quietly. He did. For the first time since she had come to Sagebrush Crossing, Mei Lin worked without pretending she wasn't there. No doorway to hide behind, no apron to shield her, just two people who shared the same kind of exile, sitting at a kitchen table that did not truly belong to either of them. "Your husband," Li Wei said suddenly, still in Chinese. "He died in the fire?" The question landed like a stone dropped into deep water. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe the fire took him. Maybe he walked into another camp and started again with a different woman who can cook. Either way, his debts stayed on my back." Li Wei was silent a long moment. Outside, the wind rattled the loose board on the side of the house. Somewhere, a horse snorted in its sleep. "You are not a debt," he said at last. "You are a person." She tied the cloth around his shoulder a little too tightly, just to keep her hands busy. "Men who buy contracts don't agree with you," she said. "To them, I am hours of work, bowls of food, warmth in a bed if they want, a number on paper." "And to you?" he asked quietly. "What are you to yourself?" No one had ever asked her that. "I am tired," she said finally. Too tired to think of more. He nodded, as if that answer made sense to him. "Tired can still be brave," he said. "I have seen that." When he left, the kitchen felt different, larger somehow, as if the walls had moved an inch farther apart to make room for the words they had just laid down between them. That night, in a narrow bed that smelled of lye soap and old cotton, Mei Lin stared at the ceiling and tried to count the ways a heart could be tired and still keep beating. She thought of Thomas, standing between her and ugly words, smiling like it cost him nothing. She thought of Li Wei, sitting at her table, letting her see the hurt in his shoulder and the gentleness he kept hidden from the world. She told herself they were just two decent men in a town that did not have enough of them. She told herself she could be grateful without reaching for more. Out on the edge of Sagebrush Crossing, the railroad tracks shone faintly in the moonlight. In the other direction, Thomas's ranch lay dark and quiet, his horses huddled together against the night wind. In a town that believed everything had to be counted and named and fit neatly into one box. 3 hearts had started, very quietly, to move in the same direction. No one saw it yet, but the day was coming when they would. By the time the first cold wind came down off the ridges, Mei Lin had been in Sagebrush Crossing long enough for people to stop calling her the Chinese woman and start calling her the one who cooks at Mrs. Carver's. It wasn't a name, but it was something. Then, one afternoon, Thomas came into the kitchen with his hat in his hands and an idea she did not know how to hold. He stood by the stove, watching her stir a pot. "You ever get tired of cooking in somebody else's shadow?" he asked. She frowned slightly. "Shadow is safe," she said. "People don't look too close." Thomas nodded, but he didn't agree. "There's an old storage room next to the livery," he went on. "Used to be a saddle shop. It's got a stove that could be fixed and a door that opens right onto Main Street. I keep thinking it's a shame nobody's using it. This town could use a place quieter than the saloon and warmer than the church steps. A place where a man could sit down, drink something hot, and remember how to talk soft for a change. You could make that place." She almost laughed, the sound small and disbelieving. "It's me? Men don't sit to drink tea. They drink whiskey, shout, and forget." Thomas smiled. "Not all of them. And even whiskey men have wives who get headaches." He hesitated. "I've seen what you boil in those little pots. You don't just cook. You mend people from the inside out." The words lodged somewhere deep in her chest, somewhere that had never had a name. A few days later, Li Wei came by the kitchen after the evening meal. Thomas was there too, leaning against the wall, boots crossed at the ankle. They looked like they had rehearsed something and were still not sure they had it right. "Thomas says there is a place," Li Wei began in Chinese, then shifted to English for Thomas's sake. "A room you could use. He thinks you should have a shop of your own. I think..." He paused, searching for the word. "I think you have more soul than these 4 walls can hold." Mei Lin wiped her hands on her apron. "I have no money," she said. "No sign, no chairs, no cups for tea. A room is empty if you cannot fill it." Thomas straightened. "I've got extra lumber out at the ranch. Old chairs that just need tightening. We can bring them in, sand them down. I know a man who can paint a sign if I pay him in beef." Li Wei nodded. "The railroad camp has crates they throw away. Good wood. I can ask the foreman for the broken ones. Between the 3 of us, we could make 4 walls into something better." She looked from one man to the other. 2 faces, 2 different histories. The same open, steady offer in both sets of eyes. It frightened her, that sameness. She had not been offered much in her life that was not tied to a price. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why do this for me?" Thomas answered first. "Because you've been holding this house together since you got here, and the house doesn't even have your name on it." Li Wei's answer came softer. "Because I have walked too many miles past doors that would not open for me. If I can help you build one that belongs to you, then maybe some part of me belongs there too." In the end, she said yes the way tired people often do. Not with a shout, but with a small nod that could still change everything. For 3 weekends, when ranch work and rail schedules allowed, Thomas and Li Wei worked on the old saddle shop. They pulled out rotten boards, hammered down loose nails, and scrubbed years of dust from the windows. Thomas fixed the stove and built low shelves from mismatched planks. Li Wei straightened the door, oiled the hinges, and measured the room as if he were laying track between her future and her past. Mei Lin cleaned until her arms ached, then unpacked the jars she had been hiding in her trunk. dried flowers, roots, tea leaves wrapped in paper. She hung 2 red paper charms by the back door, the kind her mother used to paste on their wall at New Year's. For the front, she let Thomas choose. The sign went up on a clear afternoon, the paint still tacky. "May's tea room," it said in careful letters. Underneath, in smaller script, someone had added coffee too, because Thomas insisted the town wasn't ready to give up on that. At first, people came for curiosity more than need. Church ladies slipped in during afternoons, hands still smelling of soap, asking in low voices if she had anything for nerves or for husbands who snored like freight trains. Ranch hands came on cold mornings, pretending they only wanted coffee, then asking about the funny-smelling herbs on the shelf. A widow with stiff hands came twice a week and sat near the stove, wrapping her fingers around a warm cup as if she could pull comfort straight through the porcelain. Mei Lin moved between tables, not invisible now, but still careful. She learned which men needed strong tea and silence, which women needed something gentle and sweet, and a few minutes where no one asked them to be brave. The room filled up slowly, not just with bodies, but with stories. In a town where people shared pews and fences and weather, they began, without quite meaning to share their sorrows with the woman who listened more than she spoke. Thomas came often, never making a show of it. He took the corner table near the window, where he could see the street and the light on her face when she bent over someone's cup. He brought news from the ranch, stories about foals and fences, small complaints about his own clumsy hands that made her laugh under her breath. Li Wei came when the railroad let him, sometimes late, shoulders full of dust. He took the table nearest the stove, as if he had never quite warmed up from the winters he'd spent laying track in the high country. With him, she spoke more Chinese, letting the words stretch muscles she had kept clenched for too long. More than once, townsfolk walked by the window and saw the same surprising thing. The Chinese woman from the boarding house sitting at a table between a rancher and a railroad man, her hands wrapped around a cup, while both of them leaned in to hear whatever quiet thing she was saying. It did not take long for the whispers to start. "Seems mighty friendly with both of them, doesn't she?" someone murmured outside the general store. "She's already been married once," another voice answered. "Women like that don't always know when to stop." On Sunday, the preacher paused a little longer than usual when he preached about order in God's world, about how everything had its place, every heart its proper duty. He did not say her name, or Thomas's, or Li Wei's, but Mei Lin could feel the weight of his words settling on her shoulders like another invisible debt. After the service, Mrs. Hargrove sniffed in the direction of the tea room and said, "Mark my words, nothing good comes from a door that welcomes everybody." That evening, when the lamps in the tea room burned low and the last customer had gone, Mei Lin locked the front door and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. Her feet hurt, her back ached, yet there was a small, stubborn warmth in her chest that felt different from exhaustion. She had spent a whole day in a room that bore her name. No one had bought her. No one had the right to send her away. In the dim light, she saw Thomas still at the window table, hat on his knee, and Li Wei by the stove, cup empty but not yet ready to leave. 3 people at rest in a space they had made together, holding on to a quiet none of them had known how to ask for before. Outside, Sagebrush Crossing was already inventing its own stories about what might be happening behind her painted door. Inside, Mei Lin was just beginning to understand that her own story had slipped out of the lines the town expected and started drawing something larger, something that would one day stand in the middle of Main Street and refuse to shrink back into anybody's shadow. Winter came down hard that year. Dust piled against the tea room door. The stove puffed and rattled, just to keep the cold out of people's sleeves, and business never slowed. From the street, it looked simple. A woman pouring tea. Two men who seemed to be there more than most. But inside Mei Lin, nothing was simple at all. Thomas started walking her home at night. At first, he just carried buckets and checked the alley. One icy evening, she slipped, and his hand caught hers. He never let go. They walked all the way to the boarding house with their fingers still linked, boots loud on the frozen ground. At the door, he cleared his throat and said, almost shy, that a man could get used to ending his days like that. Her chest ached. She smiled and pretended she did not understand. Li Wei came later, after the chairs sat at strange angles and the room smelled of ash and orange peel. He helped her turn the chairs, sweep the floor, bank the fire. They spoke more Chinese, letting the words move slow. She told him about the river near her childhood home. He told her about the ship that carried him away from everything he knew. When she grew quiet, he laid his rough hand over hers, not to pull her close, just to keep her from being alone with her ghosts. He told her she had made a door in this town, a place where he could remember he was more than a worker or a stranger. Looking at their hands, she felt something steady settle under her fear. If she had loved only one of them, she might have tucked that feeling into a corner and called it enough. Instead, her tired heart refused to fit the lines the town drew. When Thomas made a clumsy joke, she heard Li Wei's quiet amusement. When she watched Thomas ride out, she also saw Li Wei walking the tracks, shoulders set against the wind. The way they looked at her had begun to match. Gentle, steady, waiting, Sagebrush Crossing noticed. Whispers sharpened. One afternoon, the preacher came alone, hands folded around a cup he did not drink. He thanked her for comforting the town, then warned her that a woman could walk beside only one man in the eyes of the Lord. If she did not choose, the town would choose a name for her, and it would not be kind. After he left, the room felt smaller, like the walls had crept in. That same week, both men made up their minds without talking to each other. Thomas came one evening in his Sunday shirt, though it was Thursday. Li Wei came the next with a little packet of red paper in his pocket, wrapped around a simple silver ring from the general store. Fate, or tired clumsiness, pushed their plans together. The stove smoked, the front door stood open to let the smoke out, and the cold came in. Mei Lin had just seen out the last customer when Thomas stepped inside and said he needed to talk properly. Before she could answer, Li Wei slipped through the door, hair dusted with frost, and said he needed to talk too, not as a customer. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Thomas tried to joke about competition. Li Wei's jaw tightened. The little room that had held so many other people's troubles now held all of theirs. The old fear told her to be small and say yes to whoever spoke loudest. Another voice, newer and quieter, reminded her that she had built this room with her own hands. She was not furniture to be carried from one house to another. Her hands shook, but her back stayed straight. She told them both to sit. No more half words in separate evenings. If there was something to be said, they would hear it together. When the chairs scraped and the stove ticked, she told them the truth. She cared for them both, and she could not cut that in half just to make other people comfortable. The words hung in the steam, bare and dangerous. The two men who had come ready to claim her suddenly found themselves being asked to understand her instead. Outside, the town went on with its quiet evening, not knowing that by morning its tidy ideas about love would be standing out on Main Street, forced into the light. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mei Lin's words hovered between them. Thomas stared at the table, his big hands restless. At last he said that if he asked her to choose him, he was asking her to lie. Li Wei said that if he asked her to choose him, he would be asking her to cut off a living piece of herself and give it to the dirt. Her throat tightened, but she added one more truth. If either of them tried to turn this into a fight, if anyone put a gun in another man's hand, she would walk away from the tea room, from the town, and from both of them. Thomas really looked at Li Wei then, past childhoods and accents and bad jokes. He saw the man who had pulled him out of a flooded arroyo, the man who had shared wages when a sick calf wiped him out, the man he trusted when other cowhands turned mean. He reminded Li Wei that they had once promised not to die for anyone else's rules. Li Wei nodded. They had agreed long ago not to let other people turn them into enemies just because it made an easier story. Something in both of them loosened. They had come to claim a woman. Now they saw they were being asked to protect something bigger than any one of them. Thomas admitted he had no idea how to do this. There was no page in the preacher's Bible for 2 men, 1 woman, and no one drawing a gun. Li Wei gave a tired half-smile and said, maybe they would walk without a page, 1 step at a time, and see if the God who had kept them alive so far was as small as the town said he was. They did not solve it in one night. Nobody invents a new shape for love over a single pot of tea. But when they left together. Thomas opened the door. Li Wei banked the stove. Mei Lin watched them go with tears she would not let fall, not because she had no fear, but because for the first time her fear stood beside something just as strong. Hope. The town did not wait long to judge. Hat tips stopped. Women who had once wrapped their hands around her cups now crossed the street. On Sunday, the preacher spoke of lines that must not be crossed, of a woman who could not serve 2 masters, of confusion that was not from the Lord. He never said her name, but she heard it in every word. The breaking point came on a bright, cold morning. Mei Lin was sweeping her step when Mrs. Hargrove stopped at the edge of the boardwalk, with others lingering behind her. She said the town would not drink fancy tea from a woman who let 2 men circle her like stray dogs, and she told Mei Lin to be ashamed. For a heartbeat, Mei almost did what she had always done. Lowered her head, apologized, shrunk. Then she saw Thomas at the end of the street with a horse, and Li Wei stepping out from the livery. She saw their faces harden at the word shame. She straightened. Her hands shook on the broom, but her voice did not. She reminded Mrs. Hargrove that she had cooked for her sons, made tea for her headaches, and prayed in her own way for her sick husband. If there was shame in loving 2 men who had never raised a hand to her, while some women slept beside fists and called it holy because of a ring, then she would carry that shame herself, the small crowd murmured. The preacher came out, drawn by the tension. Thomas reached her first and took his place on her right. Li Wei came to her left. The town stared at the 3 of them standing together as if for a picture no one knew how to frame. Mei Lin's heart pounded. She thought of all the rooms where she had been traded and spoken for. Not this one. Not this life. She lifted her chin and said clear enough for the whole street to hear, I will not choose. I will keep you both. The words shocked the air. Someone gasped. A horse snorted. Her cheeks burned, but she did not look away. She said the men beside her were not perfect, and neither was she. But they had stood between her and cruelty, built walls and shelves and carried wood so her name could hang above a door instead of on a piece of paper in some man's pocket. She would not tear her heart in two to make anyone more comfortable. If that meant some people would never step through her door again, so be it. The door would still be there, and so would they. The town did what towns do with something they have no words for. It stared and waited. The preacher stepped forward. Thomas went tense. Li Wei's hand hovered at her elbow, but the preacher only looked at each of them, tired around the eyes. He said he did not know how to preach this, only that he had seen how she treated the broken, and how these two men had pulled more than one fool from a ditch without asking which side of the tracks he came from. If the Lord meant to sort it out, he had sent no telegram yet. Until then, the preacher said, he would not throw away 3 souls who were trying, in their crooked way, to be kind. It was not a blessing and not quite approval, but it was not a curse either. Sometimes that is the closest thing to mercy you get. People drifted away, some angry, some thoughtful. A few customers never came back. New ones appeared. Teamsters who cared more about hot tea than tidy stories. Widows who knew that love and loss rarely fit into square boxes. Children who thought nothing of a house at the edge of town, with 2 saddles on the rail and 2 pairs of boots by the door. Years later, folks in Sagebrush Crossing would still argue in low voices about whether it had been right. They would shake their heads, then admit the tea room had been the warmest place in town. They would remember the day Thomas took a bad fall and Li Wei sat up all night at his bed, and the way Mei Lin's voice did not shake as she gave orders to both of them, like a field marshal in an apron. Some would call it scandal. Others, more quietly, would call it courage. If you had walked past their little house on a winter evening, you might have seen what the arguments never touched. A lamp burning in the front window. A woman moving between stove and table. One man fixing a broken chair. Another patching worn boots. 3 lives, not perfect and not simple, held together by something stubborn and gentle that refused to answer to anyone's fear. Out here in the old stories of the West, people like to pretend everything was simple. 1 right, 1 wrong. 1 door open, 1 door shut. But Sagebrush Crossing had to learn what many hearts already know. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is tell the truth about the size of their own heart, and keep standing when the world says it is too much. Maybe you have spent years trying to squeeze your feelings and second chances into boxes that were never built for you. Maybe you have loved people in ways the rule books do not have words for. If Mei Lin, Thomas, and Li Wei's story touched something quiet in you, let it sit there a while. Let it remind you that kindness is never a sin, and that sometimes the most decent thing 3 people can do is refuse to turn love into a battlefield. If this story kept you company tonight, remember to subscribe so we can meet here again with more tales of hearts that refused to give up. Leave a like if Mei Lin's courage meant something to you, and share your thoughts in the comments. I do read them, and they help shape where we ride next. And if you want to be there when the next Western love story comes down the dusty road, tap the little bell so you do not miss a single step.